Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray. I'll be your guide on this 10-minute excursion into ancient history. Ancient history today, less warfare-related, but maybe warfare-related. We'll get to that. And, of course, you can ask us a question. You can support us on Patreon, and we do indeed like answering your questions. This one actually is a response to an earlier issue, an earlier episode. So this is from Northern XY, and is a reply in the comments on YouTube from the episode I did on Probus and Aurelian in a few weeks ago. And Northern XY asks, why does Marcus Aurelius never take the blame for appointing his son his heir, rather than the most qualified, like three of the four emperors before him? Maybe he should have spent less time philosophizing and more time being a father. Well, firstly, that criticism is not really Marcus Aurelius's fault. I think it's Commodus. Commodus was a bad son, not Marcus Aurelius's fault for the fatherhood, because, of course, he does have Commodus with him for a lot of the time in his northern campaigns. So the fact that Commodus is a bad emperor isn't Marcus Aurelius's fault. I don't think you can lay the blame on Marcus Aurelius. And I think it's an interesting one, because when you look at what we now call the five good emperors, which do indeed achieve the height of the Roman Empire, in the High Roman Empire in the first 80 years of the 2nd century AD, you have a pattern that Marcus Aurelius does indeed break, but he breaks it in more ways than one. But there may be reasons for that, and I think they're military. So Nerva becomes emperor at the assassination of Domitian in September 96 AD. And he then sets up, Nerva is elderly, he adopts Trajan as his heir, and, Trajan, being the best candidate for the job, becomes emperor. Then Trajan adopts Hadrian to be the best candidate. Hadrian adopts Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius adopts both Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. And then Marcus Aurelius breaks that pattern by allowing his son Commodus to succeed him. Now, that idea that the best candidate is chosen to be emperor is an interesting one, because Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus Pius don't have children. And so adopting an heir is their only option, really. They don't have children to give it to. Would they have given it to their children if they'd had them? Possible. And the other thing that's interesting, and I didn't know this until I read up on this one, Marcus Aurelius has 14 children. So he certainly breaks the mold on that one. Now, what you've got then is, as I say, Trajan adopts Hadrian, and when I say doesn't have children, he did have a daughter, Aelia, and then Hadrian adopts Lucius Aelius Caesar and an Antoninus Pius. Now, Lucius Aelius Caesar is important because he's Lucius Verus's father, which is interesting, because that then means when Antoninus Pius becomes emperor, he adopts both Lucius Verus and Marcus Aurelius. Now, the interesting thing there is the fact that when you look at the biographies of the emperors, Lucius Verus is the bad emperor and Marcus Aurelius is the good emperor. And yet, as soon as Antoninus Pius dies and Marcus Aurelius is made emperor, he immediately makes Lucius his co-emperor. And that idea that Lucius Verus is the bad emperor is certainly something that Marcus Aurelius does not buy into. Lucius Verus, in a way, seems to be the more military of the two of them. He goes off to fight the Parthian War. Again, there's a lot of criticism that he fights that Parthian War under his subordinates. Let's face it, every Roman emperor fights their wars under their subordinates. And it's the modern idea that a good emperor like Trajan or Marcus Aurelius is somehow more responsible than a bad emperor like Lucius Verus. It's like they're both using subordinates. Both are at the front. So the fact that we give Trajan credit is probably more Trajan's taking credit on the column, obviously, than the fact that Trajan's doing commanding. Marcus Aurelius similarly fights for his subordinates, but he is present. And because he's a good emperor, he doesn't get the stigma of being just there. But when you look at any bad emperor, Domitian and Lucius Verus, for instance, they are given no credit when they're at the front. But any good emperor is given credit, which is just annoying because, it's an interpretation of the presence of an emperor on a campaign front that has no more reason to back it up than a good emperor being present. So it's a really bothersome thing for me. And Domitian, for instance, was really popular with the army, something we always forget. So anyway, I digress always. What you then get, of course, is Lucius Verus and Marcus Aurelius are going to fight the German campaigns, and Lucius Verus then dies, followed very soon after by the death of one of Marcus Aurelius's sons at a young age. Lucius Verus also has children, 3 of them, but they die young. And Marcus Aurelius's son, Marcus Annius Verus Caesar, dies young in 169 as well. So it may not have been Commodus. It may have been another son who succeeded, but it is Commodus, and that's a disaster. But one of the things, of course, that why does Marcus Aurelius do it differently? I think one of the questions there is Trajan's campaign in Parthia is the last imperially led campaign until the Parthian War in 162. So Trajan's Parthian campaign in 117. So there's 50-something years of 40-something years of no imperially led campaigns. Under Hadrian and Antoninus Pius, there's very few active military campaigns occurring. And what happens as soon as Antoninus Pius dies and Marcus Aurelius becomes emperor, there's revolts in Germany, there's revolts in Britain, there's revolts in Parthia. There's the Parthian War looming, the invasion by Vologases II. There's also a usurper, Avidius Cassius, but that's on a false rumor of Marcus Aurelius's death. So there is a destabilizing in the Roman Empire by that point, almost, I would say, to the point that the good emperor adopting your heir hasn't worked. And what Marcus Aurelius inherits is a whole series of military crises that he fights either with Lucius Verus or other subordinates, one of whom is Avidius Cassius, who then usurps. So he then has his son, Commodus, with him on the Germanic front fighting. And so he then takes him on the tour of the East when they go to march to defeat Avidius Cassius. Avidius Cassius has already been defeated by the time they get there. And then they sort of tour the East to sort of show their face, if you like, and secure loyalty. But Commodus is with them. Then they come back. Commodus is made consul and married to his adoptive uncle, Lucius Verus's widow. Is that right? Yes. Can't remember. No. Anyway, the issue then is that the best candidate, to use the term in the question, probably is Commodus. He's had military experience on the front. He's got experienced generals, and he's shown his face as the heir apparent. So that should work. The problem, of course, is that as soon as Commodus comes to power, he rejects the advice of all Marcus Aurelius's generals. He makes a peace on a disfavorable peace to Rome on the northern frontier, and so is an all-round disastrous choice. He rules for 13 years, so it's a disaster, but it's not immediate. And so I don't know that we can condemn it with hindsight as much as we'd like to. I think that Commodus is indeed a bad emperor and a bad choice and makes bad choices for the Roman Empire. But the previous good choices up to Marcus Aurelius haven't succeeded in the way that we now look at them. When Marcus Aurelius comes to power and there's all these military crises, his brother emperor, who was probably the more vigorous military one, Lucius Verus, is killed. He's like, well, what's the solution here? He, of course, as we know, spends most of his time commanding from 165 to 180. This most philosophical of emperors spends 15 years campaigning, which is more than most militarily active emperors do. So he's more military than the most military emperor, and yet we like to think of him as the least military emperor. So I don't know that this great solution we see in the previous emperors is still the best solution. Again, hindsight tells us Commodus is a bad emperor. His reign leads to further destabilization, further civil wars, and then, the eventual result is the 3rd century crisis. And so it's only when you get Diocletian that you get the restabilizing of the Roman Empire. But I don't know that you can place all of that on Marcus Aurelius choosing Commodus. I think you can place some of it on Commodus being Commodus, but it's not Marcus Aurelius's fault. I hope that answers your question. So join us again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers, where I will attempt to answer your questions about ancient warfare or ancient history. Thanks. Bye.